think we can go ahead and start. It's great to see so many people here. So on behalf of Thrive, I want to welcome you to the Environment and Sustainability meeting. My name is Petra Silton. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Education for Thrive, which is the Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County. One of the wonderful things about this event is there are a lot of people on this call that are not normally at Thrive events. So I wanted to let you know a little bit about Thrive. We're a membership-based organization with a cross-sector alliance of over 200 nonprofits, businesses, government agencies, elected officials, and individuals with a shared commitment to strengthening the nonprofit sector, thereby improving the quality of life in San Mateo for everyone. We offer opportunities for cross-sector collaboration, for capacity building for the nonprofit sector, and for policy and advocacy. In our policy and advocacy work, we focus on several issue areas, and one of them is environment and sustainability. In addition to that, before we get into our program, I wanted to talk about a couple of programs that are coming up with Thrive that are very relevant. So first of all, we realize that increasing civic participation in our county will strengthen the entire nonprofit sector. And I don't know if you know this, but traditionally, environmentalists are not actually that good at voting. So we actually have created a toolkit for anybody who's interested in spreading the word about voting. It's a weekly social media post and some flyers that you can send out to your organization. So if anybody's interested in that, please let me know. By working with our nonprofit partners, we're able to empower them to do the work. In addition, we've been working very hard at census because the more people who are counted, the better representation we have. Census, because of the Supreme Court, is ending at midnight tonight, Hawaii time. So if you haven't filled out your census, please do. This is your last opportunity to really make sure that everybody is counted. It makes a big difference on what kind of funding comes locally. In addition, as far as upcoming events that might be of interest, on October 29th, we are hosting Nicole Taylor, who is the CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, to talk about thinking big. You're all welcome to join us for that. I think it's going to be an excellent conversation. We want to thank Peninsula Clean Energy and Mid-Peninsula Open Space District for the support of our environment and sustainability tags. And we want to support Sierra Club for co-hosting this particular one. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug Silverstein, our environment and sustainability lead for Thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Yes, so I lead the environment and sustainability community within Thrive. We have monthly meetings where we convene cross-sector environment and sustainability leaders to discuss real-time conservation challenges and solutions. This, I think, is our, well, 9th meeting this year. We had 10 last year. So we invite community members across 5 sectors: nonprofit, government, business, and youth. And we cover topics including 7 disciplines of climate, energy, food, land, transit, waste, and water. We invite you to come to future meetings. And also, if you're interested in presenting your programs or solutions, let me know, because we'd love to have community participation in curating meetings as we are today. We also have a new impact group called Reduce and Rethink Single-Use Plastics in San Mateo County. Very exciting group. If you're interested in learning more, please let me know. Doug at thrivealliance.org. So today's event, this is the story of Menlo Park's CAP adoption, carbon zero by 2030. It's a story about stepping back, thinking big, and taking bold climate action. As one of the first US cities to pass a carbon neutral by 2030 climate action plan, or CAP for short, the journey was not without risks, but the characters in this story, which we'll hear from now, acted smart, remained flexible, and persevered to and through the finish line. You'll be able to ask questions after hearing from the main characters, but let's now get to the narrative. And to kick this off, I pass the ball to a key visionary behind the story, an important advisor to the authors and editors, Diane Bailey, the Executive Director of Menlo Park. Diane, actually, before you get started, I do want to acknowledge 3 council members who are here today, and that is, I'm not sure if San Hindy from Foster City joined, but Alvin Royce from Hillsborough, Deborah Ruddock from Half Moon Bay, and their commissioners, staff, and council members from these cities, which we're really excited to have you. I should add, sorry, Diane, I'll get back to you in 1 second. In the chat, go ahead and introduce yourself. And if you're a staff, council member, or commissioner, please let us know where you are in your CAP process. Thank you. And now, Diane, take it away.
Well, thank you, Doug. It's great to be here. And thanks to everyone who's joining this afternoon. And a great big thanks to Thrive and to Sierra Club for hosting this event. This afternoon, you're going to hear from some of the most innovative climate leaders in the area. Menlo Park Council members Ray Mueller and Betsy Nash. They're on the leading edge of local climate action. Rebecca Lucky is one of the savviest sustainability managers, and Josie Gaylard and Tom Cabot just rewrote the playbook on how to innovate through climate action plans. You can find more information about them in their bios, which were included in the meeting reminder that went out to all of you this afternoon. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Ray Mueller. He's our first on the panel. He is former mayor of Menlo Park and a current city council member, and he's going to talk about his role advancing climate action in Menlo Park. Ray. We're going to give Ray just a minute to connect.
I was going to say, thank you, Diane. I apologize. I did the one thing that everyone seems to do. I'm not muted anymore, am I? No, great. So apologies for that. And your introduction was too gracious, Diane. It was too generous. You know, looking in Menlo Park and looking at what we've accomplished here, it's really what I would say. You know, it's very intentional, I'd say. So. We started, the work in Menlo Park started before I was even on council. It started way back when around between 2008, 2000 time period, when citizens came together and wanted to create a Green Ribbon Citizens Committee, and really started to push and try to build community stakeholders around this idea that they wanted to move policy forward in the city around this subject. And I was fortunate to come into the city about that time into leadership. And my background being, I'm a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley College of Natural Resources. I'm married to an environmental science major who also is from Cal. And so immediately understood those values and were excited about them. And in the work in the city, found myself first on the transportation committee and really started to get very interested in what was going on about transit-oriented development at that time. And then shortly thereafter found myself at council. And in that early 2012 time period, it was funny, people recognized that we needed to gather around these topics, but they were still, I think, as policymakers, afraid to really take risks around them. They're worried about the pushback. So one of the first things I remember in 2013 was, for the first time, the city decided it was going to adopt a greenhouse gas emission target. And at that time, it was a big deal that the council adopted a 27% reduction target for 6.5 years. And I, at the time, was on the council, and I was pushing for 35. I thought I was being aggressive. But we had stakeholders in the community around us who said, you know, they were pushing us to try to get to 35. We lost that night. But what we said to the community stakeholders that night, and what occurred to me that evening, was that it was to move this policy forward wasn't going to be about one group of policymakers. It was really going to be about building institutions that survived those policymakers, foundations for that in a community to really be aggressive. And so that evening, I had a couple of environmental quality commissioners, Mitch Shlomiak and Chris DeCarty, who were there. And I said, guys, you need to push us. Like, you need to push us harder. You need to push us harder. And they came to me about 2 to 3 weeks later, and they said, Ray, we have this idea. We want to form a nonprofit in Menlo Park called Menlo Park. And we want to really push policy forward. And I went with them the next year I was mayor in 2014. I went with them to the Hewlett Foundation to pitch that project, the creation of Menlo Park and the funding of that. And I remember at the time we went to them and we were in front of the Hewlett Foundation board, and we thought we were going to do something really bold. And what we said was, you know, we want to have, and we want to have zero net carbon targets by 2020. That was what we were going to push for. And I remember the board saying, do you think you'll really get there? Do you think you'll even be there? And I said, it doesn't matter if I'm there. What matters is Menlo Park will be there. And it's funny because I had forgotten about that pitch until I recently, been preparing for this, went back and looked at the pitch materials, and I thought, wow, we got there. So we can but what really happened around that, and I think what the real lesson for me was that in that process, we were smart in that it was about putting together a foundation that would survive any policymaker, but exist to push policy. And we were very fortunate that when Menlo Park was founded, Diane Bailey became the executive director because she has done such an incredible job, not just in Menlo Park, but regionally, helping with initiatives like Peninsula Clean Energy and pushing climate initiatives in other cities. And what I'd say about that process is, from a policymaker perspective, what I would say to other advocates is, you need to create a foundation that survives policymakers, that pulls people together, but that also gives people reason to believe and attract other people willing to put in the commitment and time to do good work. And that's really been the big, I think, key in Menlo Park, is that we, every risk that we've taken on a public policy perspective, we've had people with enormous talent come out and see that, be willing to have faith in that, and then put their blood, sweat, and tears into pushing us even further. And we saw that really well what happened in the CAP, because what happened was we you know, our Environmental Quality Commission, as we had this momentum building and we had this wonderful work in Menlo Park, our Environmental Quality Commission began to attract just amazing candidates who really believed in what we were doing. And that's so Tom Cabot and Josie Gaylord joined from our Environmental Quality Commission, really went and just incredible expertise, dived into what we were doing. So in 2019, the second time I'm there, Chris and Diane and others come to me and say, will you do a resolution on Earth Day saying you want to get to zero net by zero net by 2030? I said, well, yeah, sure, let's do it. Let's go for it. So I do the resolution. But by doing the resolution, it was a signal that we meant it, because it was adopted unanimously by the council. And so our Environmental Quality Commission rightfully dived in and created a plan for us, a CAP plan that put meat behind the words. And what we have coming out of that now is even more momentum, and people expressing more courage and building that momentum and doing it in a way that we're just marching along. And the other piece of advice I'd give advocates is don't make boisterous statements or try to self-promote yourself. This work is everyday good, is just let the policy work stand for itself and don't try to make grand statements about it. And as you do that, it's really hard for people to throw stones at people who are just doing good policy work, trying to advance the ball. When you stand up and you're trying to do policy work and it becomes sort of look at me, people think it undercuts the validity of the work, and people think you're just saying this about the environment or saying this.
No wonder I couldn't hear it.
To take a stand. And so I have to say that the other thing that's happened, and that I truly believe to advocates and to community members out there, is I believe that policymakers now are really starting to believe that the majority of the public supports this work, and that they're quiet, and that out there, and that those who would object are getting quieter and quieter. And those who believe in the work are starting to speak up more and more. And I think that has a lot to do with what drives me toward this work. And I know what drives my colleagues and everyone who's involved in it. And that's that we see the impact it's having now, and we see the impact that it's going to have on our children. And so people are willing to walk with us and push less back and walk in faith. And it was funny, after we adopted our REACH codes, which came before the CAP, we were one of the first cities to adopt REACH codes that said we weren't going to use fossil fuels anymore in new development. And I remember thinking, boy, you know, I expect there's going to be, when we first started talking about it, I expect there's going to be pushback. We got minimal pushback. And what I found is that when I went to coffee parties or I went to places, and back when you could see people, and I'd tell them about what we were doing in Menlo Park around this issue, the response was almost uniformly, that is really cool. I'm really proud to live in this city and to know that we're doing it. That's really cool. So those are, you always feel like you've spoken too long, but that's a little bit of the background of where we've gotten to. But really what it is creating a framework so that really good people come together and just dive in, blood, sweat, and tears, and give people a reason to believe where we're going.
Great. Well, thank you, Ray. You've really been a pillar to this whole movement and effort. So I really appreciate that. And I want to turn this over to Betsy Nash. Betsy was elected to Menlo Park City Council just recently, and she really brought a fresh perspective to the city and really an effort to try to jumpstart climate action and accelerate action. And that's been much appreciated. And so Betsy, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Diane. And hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. And it's wonderful to see such interest in this. And yes, what Ray has said is so true. It's been really just such an exciting journey to be on this, and there's so much public support out there. And I guess one of the things that's been amazing about being on City Council and just the climate action plan generally and environmental issues is how interconnected all the issues are with the environment and housing, jobs, housing, transportation, and how they all sort of work together. And at council, we've got just a tremendous number of issues and important issues that we have to decide upon. And one of the ways that we leverage ourselves is with the amazing commissions that we have and the residents who step up and work so hard on the commissions. And so that's when the EQC was, the EQC has just taken a hold of this, and the Climate Action Committee within the EQC being the Environmental Quality Commission, has just done a tremendous job working so thoughtfully on these issues. And just to, some say that there's nothing we can do about the climate change because it's such a global issue, and why is a small city working on this? And I think our climate action plan and the REACH code that we adopted last year are both examples of the city initiatives that we can, that show we can make a difference. And one of the biggest issues for me is that our climate change is going to disproportionately affect our bayfront in Menlo Park, which has disproportionately, and that's where our vulnerable communities live. And so we really need to be all pulling together on this, and it's working together to make sure that we do get, that this is taken forward, and we get, we do something before the sea level rises and we get more, we have more impacts. So I guess that there's three things. There were in Menlo Park, there were three different groups that were working on the EQC, and our EQC itself, there was an EQC CAP subcommittee of which Josie and Tom and James Payne, another commissioner, were working, and then the council CAP subcommittee, which was Ray and me. And so in that we had so many different meetings, read lots and lots of reports, And I think what, especially as on council, what we did was sort of provide guidance on what was politically viable, where we could push a bold plan, but not go so far that we would get, with being realistic, what was actually possible with being bold. And one of the big issues that we dealt with was just getting on our busy council agenda. And something that we did that I thought worked really well was 2 weeks prior to our actually making, having the council decide upon and look at the climate action plan. We had an overview for council in which Josie presented a 15-minute overview of the climate action plan to council, and it included playing a segment from a local TV interview with our mayor, Cecilia Taylor, about sea level rise and the impact on local communities. And so that, I think, basically was a great preview. And we also, with Diana Menlo Park and our commission, we got lots of community support, and lots of people were discussing and sending letters to council. And then we had a lot of public comment. And so when we actually had the meeting for the climate action proposal, it was, we're primed to deal with it. And it was a long night. There was a lot of productive discussion, and in the end, we were able to get unanimous support for those goals. And so I think really working with the commission, with community members, with outside organizations, has just greatly benefited the city, and been able to get this very bold plan put forward. And now we're going to, through the hard work of actually implementing the specific policies and looking for funding sources and all, to further implement these goals. But it's been a wonderful journey, which is just starting.
Super. Thank you, Betsy. And I want to come back to some of your comments about what works to tee up these messages later. Ray, you wanted to add one last word before we move on to the next panelist. Go ahead, please.
I was remiss in mentioning everyone who made it possible. I was remiss in not mentioning our wonderful professional staff at the City of Menlo Park, and Rebecca Lucky, who's on the call. So often, the success of these measures live and die in the willingness and the enthusiasm of our professional staff. And we have such a talented, incredible partner in Rebecca Lucky and our professional staff in Menlo Park, who are willing to go with us on this journey and provide so much professional expertise into it, and excited about it. And that's just such a huge thing. I hear actually from other colleagues in other cities that actually feel like sometimes they're running up against a brick wall to try to take these things on, and we don't have that. We're very, very lucky.
Great, thank you. And my gosh, we can't underscore that enough, that we are very fortunate to have Rebecca's expertise and commitment. And but I'm going to stick with the order of our panelists, and we're going to hear from Rebecca in a couple minutes. But first, we're going to hear from Josie Gaylard, who's one of the newest environmental quality commissioners in Menlo Park, and she brings a lot of business savvy and passion to the commission. She really hit the ground running. So Josie, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks. So it's super inspiring for me to hear, even from Ray and Betsy, things I hadn't heard before. So I am new to this group of folks you see on the screen here with the panel. I joined the Environmental Quality Commission about a little less than a year and a half ago. Little background on me, I have an MBA and went to work in the solar industry in the early 2000s. And after a really interesting run with a company called SunPower, stepped off the corporate track and raised a son. And then when he was 12 and kind of on his own, I was thinking, I really want to work on climate. It was obviously related to the work I'd done in solar, but the climate situation was just getting so much worse. I think the fires 3 years ago were a real turning point for me. When I had to buy air filters for my house. And I started thinking, you know, as my son got older, what is my legacy here, right? Like, so I have this background in business. I could go back and work in clean tech, which is super exciting now. But I kind of feel like actually business has brought us all the solutions we need to all of these problems. So adding me to the mix wasn't going to really advance the whole climate issue and solutions. So when I looked around, I actually thought, you know, government is where we need to kind of really move the ball forward now, because the solutions are there. The technology is there. Now we need the political will to take action. So Diane, you know, suggested that I apply for the position, join the EQC, and shortly after I joined, it became clear that we needed an update to our climate action plan, and staff were really stretched. So we, you know, Tom and I and others thought, hey, you know, why don't we help you out? Why don't we do a draft of the cap? And big kudos to Rebecca Lucky for this, because I've, you know, now that I know a little bit more about how cities work, I can see that for her to say to us, okay, yeah, you guys write the draft, was a big deal. So to hand over those reins to a citizen commission and to feel, you know, to trust us to do the work and to deliver a product to her that she could then, you know, evaluate and sort of decide to move forward with the council. It just takes a lot of, you know, confidence in her own, you know, her own ability and position, and also trust in us. So I really give her a lot of credit for that. So then we were off and running. That was July of 2019. I think, again, Ray had some, you know, a message to us, which was, you know, stretch us, bring us something, you know, that's really going to get us there. So we took that to heart. We really believed him, that he was, you know, sincere in that. And we looked at the climate problem and said, what do we need to do to solve this problem? And it's not just solving it in Menlo Park. We had to solve it in time to then be an example to other cities. So we couldn't wait for the IPCC, you know, 2050 goal. We had to solve it by 2030 so that then whatever we do, we could open source to any other city that wants to copy us. And, you know, so that gave us a real strong sense of urgency. So we, I would say within a month or two, we had sort of a rough outline of here's what we need to tackle. It's basically vehicles and buildings. And, you know, let's go back to City Council and get their blessing. You know, by December, they'd given us the blessing on that. And then we got into the details of writing the plan. You know, at that point, or I would say earlier even, we read, you know, dozens of climate action plans from all cities all over the world. Vancouver, you know, lots of California cities that have written climate action plans. One thing I noticed was that, you know, coming from business where you have to be able to say everything in like a 5-slide PowerPoint deck, that these climate action plans were very, they were like 150 pages long. I was trying to imagine a busy council member having read one of these things, and I just couldn't see it. So I felt like, let's ditch the 150-page plan that is kind of has a lot of fluff, and let's put together something that is a real plan, which means, you know, what are you going to do? Who's going to do it? How much is it going to cost? What's your goal? You know, how are you going to measure yourself? That's how we do it in business. So I was, again, bringing that mentality of like, you know, when in business, you launch a product and you do it on a short time frame. And so in my mind, we got a big problem we're trying to solve, and we got a short time frame to solve it. So, so let's put together a real plan that really solves the problem. You know, let's not compromise with ourselves. Let's let the council compromise if they need to do what's politically more palatable, but let's just come to them as advisors with, okay, here's the problem, here's how you're going to solve it. And then, you know, that's our advice, but you get to decide, can you go that far or not? So we didn't want to compromise. And so we set a bold goal, which was 90% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030. And reducing that further 10% with direct carbon sinks. So not offsets, but, you know, afforestation or biochar programs, you know, ideally within a small radius of the city. So that's the goal. And so now we're off to the races, you know, trying to put the actual policies and ordinances into place to actually achieve the goal. And it's not going to be easy. You know, one of the things I see happening now more and more with the fires is the public sense of urgency is, you know, growing. But people don't have, there's this gap between people's worry and their anxiety and then their sense of what agency over it, right? Their sense of understanding of what they need to do to act. I think people think like, maybe if I recycle, that's going to solve the problem. And you should recycle, but that's not enough. There's more that needs to be done. We need to get natural gas out of our buildings and gasoline no longer powering our vehicles or getting us around, because there's other ways to get around. So those are sort of the big things that we sort of bit off and are working on now. I would say that the work that we did with Ray and Betsy was really key. So in terms of people out there who might be working for cities, you know, city staffers and thinking about how to structure this type of thing, we had a subcommittee of 3 on the EQC that did the work. And then the council decided that they needed a subcommittee of 2, which was Ray and Betsy. And then because of Brown Act, you know, we 3 on the EQC couldn't interact with other people on the EQC on this issue, but we could speak to Ray and Betsy. And so that enabled us to get their feedback on, you know, what are their thoughts as the people who are close to the voters and who are elected, what was going to work, what was not going to work. And then, so we were able to sort of iterate on the plan. So that was super useful. And then they both have just been huge allies. So when it came down to the final vote, both Ray and Betsy were key at helping the other council members who hadn't been as closely involved, helping them understand why it was so critical and why what we were putting forward were the right solutions to the problem. So I think one last thing is why we do this, and I think everyone on this panel will say this, for our kids. You know, I kind of started, that's why I jumped back in, because my kid was at an age where he didn't need me at home anymore. But, you know, the smoke that we're breathing this year, I know we all would like to think that maybe next year it'll be better. But the science tells us that this is the best year of all the years to come in the rest of our life. So enjoy it, because it's not going to get better for us. It may get better for our children, but that means that when our children are older and they're looking back at this time, they are going to wonder, people are going to study this time, and they're going to study the leaders of this time. And people are going to ask, so everyone knew that this was a problem. Why didn't they act? That's what they're going to ask. The scientists were telling them, why didn't leaders step up and act? And to the extent that I'm a part of this story for my son, not for anyone else, but for my son, I want him to be able to say, my mom did everything she possibly could to make the story have a different ending. So on that, pass it back to Diane.
Wow, amen to that. Thank you, Josie. And I want to add one more detail that you didn't add, because you were being gracious and giving credit to a lot of other people. A lot of cities spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on consultants to do climate plans. And Josie, with help from other commissioners, produced the plan, no consulting fees. So I just want to recognize that for a moment, because it's pretty cool. Okay, turning over to Rebecca Lucky. And finding my notes. Okay, so next we'll hear from Rebecca Lucky, who's really the sort of person who's kind of behind the scenes on this. She managed a team of staff and experts and a lot of different stakeholders to bring a massive effort forward. And she did it while making it look super easy. So Rebecca, please go ahead.
Thank you, Diane, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having and attending this forum. And so I the question is, what was my role? And as a staff person, it's always this unique challenge. I study environmental studies. I am an advocate of this, but also I wear my government hat of ensuring that whatever policies we're looking at are going to work, and that they're going to minimize impacts to stakeholders. So for adopting a cap that's aggressive, I probably look like the person that was raining on everyone's parade. And just trying to talk through what the process looks like, what the budget constraints are. But I think there's a whole nother level that goes along with that too, as you introduce the constraints and the barriers, and this goes even when we're exploring policy options, is how can we poke at those constraints and barriers? You know, where are the weak points, or where are the points that are no longer valid in today's world, and trying to go above and beyond that, because we do really have to envision a different way of creating policy and a different way of seeing how things are done. And so I think a lot of it's the question I always posed, the question I always pose to the EQC and council, and even my internal colleagues, is really trying to find those points where local government intervention is warranted. And I mean, and that's probably what I provide as the role of, you know, is this really the right spot for Menlo Park to intervene, or is there some other agency, or is there a technology, or is the market already handling this area? And then there are some key areas where government local intervention is warranted. And so we really try to turn up every one of those stones to look at, you know, are there equity issues with, you know, certain access to technologies? Are there barriers that we can create policy around to remove that for people? And so I think my other role is just informing, as Councilmember Nash pointed out, there's a lot of work that the city's already doing in this area that it runs complementary to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. When looking at the housing crisis, when looking at traffic congestion and trying to solve for those issues, those are directly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I think sometimes it's looking at a plan and wanting to do, you know, lots of different things, but also recognizing what we're already doing and what else could we do above and beyond that to get greater greenhouse gas emissions. And so, and the last part is really just about process and how do you elevate this amongst all the other competing city council priorities, right? We're trying to build a new community center. We're dealing with the housing crisis. We're also dealing with transportation. We're also in the middle of a pandemic. So where does the climate action plan, you know, fit into what we currently have budgeted for staff resources amongst all these other areas? And for Menlo Park, the City Council sets an annual work plan, and then they have their top 5 or 6 priorities that they work on. And so it's really informing on, you know, where this would fit in the process, and once that's elevated, we can go for the resources that we need and figure out what kind of capacity we need. And you know, I think handing it off to the Environmental Quality Commission, I think, you know, it wasn't that difficult. I appreciate Commissioner Gillard's kind of thought of me having to really let go. But you know what, I really think that the commission is very, not only passionate individuals, but they are also very knowledgeable. And the focuses that I heard coming out of the commission were really the things that we would typically see from consultants or come from staff. So they were definitely focusing in on the right policies to look at. Did I answer the question, Diane?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Turning it over to Tom Cabot. Tom is really a veteran of clean energy and climate policy, and Menlo Park is extremely lucky to have someone like Tom on the Environmental Quality Commission. And so without delaying him any further, Tom, please go ahead.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Diane. It's great to be able to get together with you folks and to start to do what we can to share the story about how achievable it is to develop impactful, simple plans. And you know, the thing that got me inspired was from the prior year when we were trying to tackle a reach code. A reach code was a new thing, and I'd been to a seminar about reach codes and started talking to city staff about it, and to Rebecca, and she remembered having done a reach code, a little one in prior years that was to move the city a little increment further ahead, and that it was a difficult lift back then. And then as we talked more about it, and she realized that you know, this movement was going on and there was something to do in it, she and other staff members, including Chuck Andrews, a building official, they figured out a a much more impactful and simpler way to do a reach code that simply truncated the ability to put in gas devices. Instead of all us engineers, I'm an engineer, we were figuring all these differential methods. And so just seeing how she threaded that needle and created what's now called a Menlo Park style reach code that's being adopted by lots of other cities showed me the example of, okay, you know, trust other people who can step back and see the problem from a further perspective to come up with a new way to solve it. You know, the way we've been trying to inch the ball forward may not be the right way. And as Josie's been pointing out, the science is changing around us and we're all seeing climate change. And we know we don't have time to inch forward. We have to start obeying that command given by the IPCC, a fully compromised body of scientists that gives a watered down science. But what they've shown us is they're saying we now have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in every way we can and in ways that are rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented. And so that, from my 30 years of city experience as an employee of a gas and electric municipal utility, I know that rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented was not the type of instructions I normally got from city government. You know, they would tell me, we want you to innovate, but by following what other people have done, and things like that. So anyway, we had this opportunity, this example of staff's development of the REACH code and other cities picking it up that made us at the EQC start looking at the climate action plan and think, okay, let's take that on too. And as Josie said, we didn't want to make a 150-page shelf ornament, but we wanted to figure out what can we do to make a document that's sleek and readable and impactful and gets to the meat of the problem and the several big things we have to do. So we took that look and we basically just, the mechanics of it, being an engineer, I just look at it as, okay, we started with the greenhouse gas inventory and we saw where are those emissions coming from, what kinds of devices, buildings, cars, et cetera, where are these fleets of devices, what can we do to influence them? And we'd think of each of these different measures we could implement and try to figure out, you know, how would we design something? How would it reach people? What fraction of the people can we reach with this information? What fraction of those would respond to it and take the action? And then what would our results be? So that was all kind of shaves down as you move across that set of factors. And then on the flip side, seeing how the REACH code worked and was able to assist so many other cities in doing this, the great decarbonization of new construction, we go to the expansion side of it, which is, what if we're able to put forward a plan that inspires other cities? And we provide tools, spreadsheets, and our simple report and post it on a website, and folks are able to pick it up, and there are measures in their new actions that get picked up, and it's able to be impactful. And so it's not just the little things we're going to do in Menlo Park, it's that we're trying to help other people and try to work as a regional partner to help others move forward and adopt bolder actions. And just like in the REACH codes, as a first mover, we had to make some compromises because we were in uncharted territory. And then following us, other cities have become more bold and leapfrogged the REACH code we put out with the Menlo Park style, but attacking more uses and fewer exemptions. So we're seeing that, and we're betting on that type of thing. So we just see it as a chance for cities to cooperate together and for cities to interact with Peninsula Clean Energy, the energy provider. And as we do this electrification, it generates net revenue that becomes available at Peninsula Clean Energy to do programs. They can direct that net revenue into incentives that help make these programs cost effective for the participants. And when the council sees that the Peninsula Clean Energy has incentives that make things cost effective, the council becomes emboldened and realizes, wow, we can mandate a policy to adopt this cost-effective measure. And when the councils are able to mandate those things, they get more volume, more participation, a conformance with the policy, and that generates more net revenue. And so these things can become a virtuous cycle. So we are looking at a way to dig ourselves out of the climate problem by seeing, what can we do together, staying in our lanes, as advisors, we have the EQC are giving advice and building tools, and we're letting council make decisions and staff do implementation, and we offer assistance as needed for that implementation. But anyway, it's been very wonderful to be part of the teamwork. And like Josie said, the future does look tough for us, but the legacy is right, and it feels so good to be taking action and to be part of a team that's figuring out how to work together. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Tom. Thanks. Well, before I start up the some of the questions for our panel, I'm just going to add a couple of comments. Thank you to all of the panelists. It's really amazing to hear all of the progress over recent years and really ramping up over the past year. When our co-founders, Mitch Slomiak and Chris Ducardi, started Menlo Spark in 2014, they set a vision for Menlo Park, and we got to work. And as Ray mentioned, to put it in perspective, the original climate action plan for Menlo Park had a 2020 goal of a 27% greenhouse gas reduction. And that seemed like such a heavy lift at the time. So we have come a long way. And we at Menlo Spark have really tried to stay focused on transformational change, and just to thread the needle on a lot of the great measures that have been mentioned, really focusing on fossil fuels as being the primary driver of climate change, and especially here in our suburban environment. We're really looking at carbon pollution coming from our vehicles and coming from our buildings. And so working with the community and businesses, and of course city leaders, we've really steadily been supporting clean power through Peninsula Clean Energy, through electric vehicle charging infrastructure requirements. It's a mouthful, but really boosting electric vehicles through smart city planning, where we now have zoning standards that require 100% renewable energy in new buildings. And then finally last year with REACH codes requiring all electric construction for new buildings and avoiding fossil gas. These are really the building blocks that it takes. And it's important to stay focused on those larger measures that bring about clean energy and really get us off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. As some of us, our panelists mentioned, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and it's not easy to move high impact climate measures this year. And so it's really inspiring to see how a city like Menlo Park can move forward with a pretty bold climate goal this year. And not just in a pandemic, but during economic upheaval and civil unrest, with racism coming to the fore and violence, and of course with the climate crisis itself, and one of the worst years for wildfires and extreme weather. It's just not easy to do this work. So props to the folks on this panel for just kind of charging forward and tuning out all of these things. I'm going to do a really quick screen share because I have this image that captures the moment right now. Just bear with me one moment. Okay, let me put this in. This image that was on grist.org the other day really captured the moment for me, because you're not imagining that the climate impacts that we're feeling have been intensifying. And so we can choose to either freak out about it or take stock that, yes, we're feeling much greater impacts of climate, as Josie noted, that, it has gotten worse. And this article was this is a terrible photo. I'm going to take it down in a moment. But this article was all about scientists and how they're coming to terms with the fact that, I'm going to read the quote, sorry, bear with me, that the climate impacts are happening faster than we thought that they ever would. And that's true, but we all have the agency to do something about it. And so I want to share a couple of statistics just to motivate folks that we can quantify the impacts, and we should, because we need to use those statistics and quantifying the impacts to convince our fellow colleagues and fellow cities You know, when we use the term, it takes a village to get big things done. Actually, in the real world, it takes many, many villages banding together. And that's what we need to do right now is look at what Menlo Park is doing, look at what's happening in Burlingame and Sunnyvale and all of these other cities that are taking action on climate, and figure out how we can work together to really accelerate action. Because at the end of the day, if we slow walk climate action, we're really widening the equity divide, because we know that climate impacts real people. It has a health toll on people, and it has an economic toll. And just to share a few statistics before we move on, the United Nations, they released a study this week, and they talked about how climate change has really driven a dramatic increase in extreme weather over the past 20 years. And they've quantified over 1 million lives lost from these extreme events, and almost $3 trillion in expenses. So we can't attribute, I'm going to stop the screen share just a moment. We can't attribute all of these impacts to climate, but we know that it's worsening in a really big way. And we know that we had the hottest September in record this year, and it was preceded by 7 years in a row of the hottest September in record, and 2020 is set up to follow that trend. So these are all really concerning trends. And I want to turn back to the panel to talk a little bit more about how we can translate some of these things that we've advanced in Menlo Park to other cities, and really work together and collaborate a little more on accelerating climate measures together. And Doug, I know you had a couple questions teed up, and so I want to turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, inspiring work by all you guys. Thank you for setting the bar for us. I'm a Burlingame resident. I see a lot of staff members and commissioners, council from other cities. What question, what do you do if you don't have an EQC? And I'll throw that to anyone, but very few of us cities do. You mentioned a task force. Can't just get an EQC together that fast, but what can we and other cities do? Or can you just come in and, can you be our EQC?
So I'll jump in on that one. One of the advantages of not having hired a consultant, sometimes when you hire consultants, they run a bunch of numbers for you and do modeling, and it's all a black box. And when you ask them, can you show me those numbers? They can't show you because that's their proprietary information. We did modeling, but we're open sourcing everything. So you want to copy our climate action plan, you want to cut and paste parts into your plan, go for it. You want to use our model, go for it. So our objective, we're all volunteers. Our objective is solving climate change. So that's one thing that cities can do to collaborate more, is to make everything they do available in every way they can to other cities to use.
I thought I'd also weigh in, Doug. The issue when you don't have say an environmental quality commission, and just seeing the other night here in Menlo Park, we had 7 great applicants for 1 seat on our commission. And I looked at that, and I'm just thinking about the talent. We've had a member of the public who comes to every meeting and comments every meeting and wants to get involved. And so Josie and I met with him separately recently, and we're trying to peel off a task for him to take on. So we think, or as I look at it, I think every city should consider harvesting the talent of concerned citizens. As we're seeing climate change around us, many of your citizens are going to become concerned, and a lot of them have the kinds of skills and energy that will be helpful for guiding the city forward. So my thought would be, form something like an EQC, a standing body, give it authority over making advice and recommendations regarding climate change. And you can include other topics too. Encourage them to split into subcommittees so they can work within Brown Act constraints and make progress. Our subcommittee of 3 had many hours of meetings between our monthly meetings. So do those kind of things to really enable that, and then start figuring out ways to harvest the energy of people who want to help and haven't yet fit onto the climate or onto the commission. And so expanding things like trying to see, are there tasks people can take on and provide input that helps the EQC make additional progress.
Thanks, Tom. One more question then. If you have a question, raise your hand or put it in the chat. To Betsy and Ray, what was the biggest hurdle to clear to get this passed? Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
Myself. I think the biggest hurdle for a policymaker is their own psychology of whether or not they can do it. Once you clear that, then really the rest of it is just the nuts and bolts of it coming together, right? I think early on, so what I'd say to other policymakers is create the framework to attract the very best people. So like if we, speaking of the last question, if we didn't have an Environmental Quality Commission, I probably never would have met Chris and Mitch, and they never would have formed Menlo Park, and that never would have started the whole series of events that got us to today. So I really think that the biggest hurdle is being able to tell people, gathering a really good group of people together, telling them, push you as far as you can push me, and then once you feel like they've pushed you that far, go a little further. So, and have faith. So, and that's really, I think, really where, as for myself personally, how we've gotten here is I've asked people to keep pushing me. I've tried to get over my own psychology of will people accept it, and I've been rewarded every time by going a little bit further. And now to the point that I really do think that a lot of what's blocking policymakers from doing this work is a false premise now.
Well,
Betsy, did you want to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I would add to that just all the many agenda items, especially during the pandemic, that are coming before us, and just finding the bandwidth. And that's, again, where staff, Rebecca, was really helpful, sort of paving the way with that and having someone to work with, and also the people coming out from the community and the EQC and everybody basically saying this is important to us, in addition to council members. So basically just getting the community support and to get the visibility for it.
Thanks. Manini from Saratoga had a question, and you can unmute yourself and just ask yourself. I like your question about partnerships. If you want to ask, unmute. If not, I can ask it for you.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Manini from the city of Saratoga. So my question is really more about how we can create partnerships with the community and maybe the businesses in our community and grassroots efforts. You know, I'm highly sensitive about the current political climate that we're in. And I do think that in a city, you know, there's a huge community and everyone is a taxpayer and everyone wants to feel like their voices are heard. And because of that, I think pushing regulation is something that I really try to be careful about when it comes to developing policy with our city elected officials. So my question is, how would you guys recommend cities develop these types of relationships, and what kind of plans can we put in place to help educate and reach out so that there's more education about it, rather than letting them know, hey, you know what, here's a reach code, now you need to do this. What steps can we do ahead of time to make sure that they're ready for that before we tell them that they have to do electrification? That's my question.
Ray, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Yeah, and I won't talk too long because I think Rebecca probably has more to say than I on this, but I think you do need to do outreach to stakeholders. But the one thing I'd say is I would not overemphasize a pushback to regulation, because the way I look at it and began to look at it was every couple of years a fire code comes out and everybody has to comply with the fire code, and they're able to do that. And in a business environment, what matters to a business environment and investor is certainty. If they know what the rules are, they can go ahead and plan for those rules. And so what really comes down to is putting together regulations that the business environment that the business community, your stakeholders, have had an opportunity to look at, tell you if there's anything really terrible, and you can vet whether or not they're being straight with you or whether or not maybe they're not. And then after you've gotten through that process, then you want to make it where there's enough certainty in the rules as possible so people can execute on those things. And what we found in Menlo Park when we were going through the REACH codes was our professional staff did a wonderful job of doing community stakeholder work. And where we actually thought we were going to have pushback on regulation, we actually had support, because what happened was our stakeholders came forward and said, we can do this, we can make this work. We figured out how to go ahead and create the exceptions necessary for the very few restaurants that weren't interested. But a wonderful thing happened when we were talking to restaurants about our REACH codes. A lot of them came forward and said, we can do it and we want to do it. And then we also had a wonderful thing happen where our residential developers, where we thought we might get some pushback, even came forward and say, we can do this with this fix. And we were able to get that done. So I would say to you, don't overestimate the fact that there'll be pushback on regulation, because regulations come down every year. It's just a question of getting to those people, those stakeholders in advance, so you can get their input, so you can figure out what's real or not. And then it's just like the fire code coming down. As long as it's certain and they know how to comply with it, they can go ahead and build their plans, their business investment plans around that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I can add. I would just only add that, you know, for the CAP development, I think that was a really key thing in the council subcommittee with Councilmember Nash and Mueller and the EQC subcommittee, and looking at, you know, making sure that the CAP it had very strategic actions in there, but also leaving some open-endedness in there. So just giving what policy examples could look like, and also just keying into, you know, we're going to explore these some more, because, okay, bye, thanks. Fixing my bike. So I think in those kind of components, it allows a lot of flexibility for stakeholders to engage later on. And that was a struggle I had as a staffer, which is, you know, usually we do a robust public engagement for a CAP plan. But when you kind of take a few steps back and realize, you know, the urgency, and also that it's very difficult when you have so many different measures to get everybody involved, that people only really care when it's right in front of them. And for them to engage as we're going through. And I think the other issue is that technology changes and state regulations change. So to kind of have, you know, 100 measures and you're only able to really address, you know, maybe 6 of them in a year, you know, it's really trying to target those stakeholders when you're working on it in that year or that time span that the project is going on. And so I think that's important for CAPS, and just engagement and kind of leaving that open-endedness to kind of continue the conversation later with stakeholders. And then as you get into the actual work of it, then it's really the rolling up your sleeves time. Okay, stakeholders, come to the table. You know, you've got your environmental advocates, you've got people who are going to be financially impacted. And can these two groups, you know, work together to come to an agreement or learn more? And I think even with the REACH codes, it's very difficult just to have a general meeting, but you know, because it's so technical and it goes into such depth, that you really need people to be engaged, at least some representatives of that industry or that particular stakeholder group, to be really engaged on that technical level throughout the process, so that they can communicate that to their peers, because that's most successful. And so I think as a small city in Menlo Park, that's probably the beauty of working in smaller cities. I think I've told Commissioner Cabot and Gillard this many times, it's like a test tube for policy, because really Menlo Park is so diverse as far as the demographics in our community and the types of industry that are in our community, that, you know, we have those different, that diversity, but that diversity is kind of in that smaller number of groups where we can talk to individuals, and if we can get some buy-in with those individuals, that the rest of the industry will come along in general. And then the last part is the partnerships with nonprofits, with, you know, PCE, Peninsula Clean Energy. I think they, in Menlo Park, they play a role in helping to educate the communities far beyond what staff. I think a lot of times we tend to carry a lot of that weight on our shoulders, when that can also be shared amongst others that have very good information, and can reach out to these stakeholders as well. So I think it's leaning on those folks too, to leverage our resources.
Thank you.
Betsy,
That
I
was
think
very
you wanted
helpful.
to add. Yeah, and then Tom.
Well, actually, I will let Tom talk about most of it. I was going to mention that there's also financial reasons to go ahead and do some of these policies now, or at least educate people, both for obvious health reasons and the environment, but also for financial reasons as the state comes down with various mandates. And as Tom has taught me, stranded assets and just the cost if you put in equipment now that will not be allowed later, that you will have to pay more. So get the equipment in now, and Tom will probably have a much better explanation of that.
Well, I'll build on that good explanation, but the whole concern for us as kind of public servants is a reasonable one. It is, what can we do that's prudent? And what we're realizing with natural gas fired equipment in buildings is it's no longer prudent. It's already environmentally obsolete. It will have to be removed in order to meet the state's climate protection targets in the future. So the most prudent thing for us to do is not to let people strand those assets and make those investments that are very costly to undo later. So we get on top of it that way. So that's a time where putting in the REACH code ahead of the education is fine. The REACH code is the thing that's going to save everyone money, all the builders. But to the extent you want to do education also, we've seen lots of laissez-faire approaches to preserving the environment, and that's what has led to that room on fire that Diane showed us. You know, we probably have to quit relying on the goodwill of good actors and start putting the playing field in place for people. As Councilmember Mueller mentioned, you know, businesses will respond to the set of rules you set up and they will operate well among them. So, you know, I see lots of ways to go forward on that. I kind of think maybe a thing cities might want to do through their libraries is set up some kind of a book club or discussion group to harvest or provide an outlet for people who want to start talking about the climate problem and what they can do locally. And so, you know, that might be an education thing to run parallel to doing these effective, impactful policies.
That's a good idea. Get your librarians involved. Actually, I wanted to pull in potentially some audience members. So I know there are a bunch of people from Sunnyvale, or a couple of people from Sunnyvale. One of them asked a question. I kind of want to turn the question back to you and have you ask you how you might work with these 6 panelists. Is there a way to collaborate? The question was, you know, how can we be more ambitious, from Doug. And if you're on the line or your colleague wants to jump in, is, you know, what are you learning? How could you collaborate potentially with this group here? How could we work together? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is how do we extend what Menlo Park has done to other cities? And Sunnyvale, maybe you want to jump in. Or other cities, feel free. City staff.
Or Ray, if
Doug,
you
there's
want
Doug.
to jump in and... Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, I think that, you know, that's the reason why I signed on was just, you know, while I'm happy with, you know, the efforts that we've had to date, I'm, you know, inspired by, you know, what you've done there in Menlo Park, and I'm just trying to figure out, you know, how much of it is potentially applicable and transferable. So, you know, I imagine that, you know, in terms of, you know, what we could, you know, possibly learn from or collaborate on, you know, I think that, you know, looking at what you guys have done in terms of, you know, being more aggressive, for example, with buildings, would be something that we would be looking at. I know that we already have some related efforts going on here in terms of new construction, but specifically with existing buildings, I think that that's an area that we're interested to see what you guys have in place and see what might be transferable.
Anyone from Menlo Park want to How would you transfer? I mean, let's get down to a little bit of details on that particular one. What could you guys?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we're doing right now, and is that we're really identifying cities who have the same intentions and really trying to collaborate with them at a regional level and sit those stakeholders down, share materials, and try to figure out what next steps they can take, and what next steps we're taking, what we can give to them. And also, candidly, within the cap, there are some items that are going to be larger ticket than others. So to have more regional stakeholders working together on those items makes it more possible for Menlo Park to pursue them. And so, so what I'd say, to that question is I'd try to identify other cities who are, the other thing is we have a really great sponsor at the county in Supervisor Dave Pine. He's just such a willing partner to work with us and to convene stakeholders together. So we would, I mean, as Josie mentioned, we consider everything that we're doing open source. We'll share everything. And if there are regional partners, city partners who want to sit down with us, or nonprofit partners who are interested in pushing to get something done that they need partnership in, we are looking to be a willing partner. Because some of these things we just can't get done by ourselves. So.
Yeah, Doug, I just want to add to that to say that we also have wonderful partners with our community choice energy agencies, with Peninsula Clean Energy and Silicon Valley Clean Energy locally. That is a great place to convene cities over climate actions and to provide support through their staff that have really wonderful expertise and, maybe even a little bit of funding. But we saw that level of collaboration and support with the REACH codes. That was a fantastic effort where a lot of the cities came together with support and backing from SVCE and PCE. And we'd love to see a similar approach when it comes to existing buildings. That will be a heavier lift. And also when it comes to electrifying transportation.
And then I would just add to that for probably the more heavier lifts for us is the electrification of existing buildings and expanding electric vehicle charging infrastructure to existing multifamily properties. And I think there is an opportunity, and what that could look like is that the cities join us as we go through this policy analysis exploration task, right? Because I think that would be very key to getting what you need, because you're going to probably face the same issues that we would face and bring up issues that we may have not observed or had thought about. And that work is really going to begin heavily we're starting in November, but it's really going to pick up between January and June of next year. And so if there are staffers here that want to join that, I'd be open to that. You can just email me and we'd be happy to do that. But I think what you would do with that then is, once you have that policy analysis and the different options and the cost effectiveness of these certain options that include burnout, it can include time of sale, can include retrofits are possible and ones that we're looking at, is that you can then take that into your own community engagement. Every community is still going to need to do that at some level, because your stakeholders were going to feel differently than our stakeholders are going to feel on that front. So I think that's a way to move forward as well.
Yeah, I would just jump in and say, I think the key pieces of the policies that come out of the CAP that where cities, I see a lot of cities doing silo things, right? Everyone's doing cost effectiveness. Everyone's paying for, looking at legal options. And so I feel like there's a lot of that work that could just be done once and then shared. And other cities can, similar to what was done with the REACH codes. So I think that there's ways that we could all, pitch in to do some of this investigative work. Like if you think your city eventually is going to look at existing buildings, reach out to Rebecca. Maybe there's a way that your city can be involved, because the cost effectiveness is cost effectiveness, and that's going to apply across all the cities. So better not to every city reinvent the wheel.
Yep, I thought I'd weigh in as well on that. Thinking of up here in San Mateo County, they've got their RICAPS group of sustainability professionals, and a similar group, the MOG, Member Agency Working Group in Santa Clara County. But perhaps an agenda item for those different groups might be trying to see how do they form teams across their different participants that can divvy up the work products and produce different parallel parts and then bring them back together again. So, you know, I think all of these agencies, we're all stressed in terms of dealing with the COVID problem and reduced budgets, and then dealing with an accelerating climate problem. So figuring out some ways to divvy up the task and trust each other to do their parts, bring it together again, assemble it, and then have something greater than each of our contributions.
Any other audience questions? Or Diane, did you want to ask one of yours? Audience questions, audience can just unmute yourself and jump in. We're informal here.
Yeah, I was seeing a couple of questions on the chat, and folks, Diana, if you're still on, I saw a few questions from you if you want to unmute and ask. Otherwise, we could read them.
I had a question about leaf blowers, if you saw that one. Gas-powered leaf blowers, whether your CAP addresses that, and if so, what's the recommendation on how to implement? We're very concerned about putting a burden on our gardeners and trying to figure out at this difficult financial time for so many people and trying to figure out how to roll something out.
Great.
So I'll let Josie and Tom answer where it is now, but what I can say, as recently as last year, our EQC had looked at leaf blowers, I think a year before, and had decided not to touch them yet. And the reason why, because the battery life for a commercial leaf blower, for someone using it in the field, was not long enough to sustain the charge for a full day's use. And what was considered would happen would be the person would then run their truck in order then to recharge the leaf blower. And so you would be running a much larger engine burning fuel to charge this leaf blower. And so now recently it's been brought to our attention that the battery life on those leaf blowers may be becoming improved. And certainly when that happens, I think it's something we're going to pick up right away. But I think that the reason for that unintended consequence, I think, is it stalled that recommendation in the EQC. Is my understanding.
So I'd like to jump in too. Yeah, everything Ray said is right on. The other thing is we've looked at the greenhouse gas emissions on leaf blowers, and it's actually a tiny, tiny contributor to the climate problem. And I know there's some sort of misleading information out there. People getting confused between nitrous oxide and nitrogen dioxide, which I'm happy to go into further. But basically nitrogen dioxide is a serious lung irritant, and it's really problematic for health reasons. So two-stroke engines put out a lot of, it's basically like soot, right? It's just bad for your health, but it's actually not bad for the climate. Now, nitrous dioxide is a huge problem for the climate, but the leaf blowers don't emit that. So sometimes people get those confused. So it's actually not a huge, leaf blowers are not a huge climate problem. They're a health problem, and there are very good reasons to address them for health reasons. But in terms of the climate problem, it's like 1/1000th of as much greenhouse gas emissions as your car puts out or as your furnace puts out. So we just feel like we need to really focus on those big, heavy hitters. And then we can turn our attention from a purely a climate perspective, and then we can turn our attention to, things like leaf blowers.
But one other thing about the leaf blower problem, we do need to be sensitive to justice issues there, and the folks who tend to use the leaf blowers a lot are highly mobile, crossing territories quite a bit. So one little city's rule is going to have a hard time being impactful. So we do think that there are efforts at bigger entities, county levels, air quality management districts, et cetera. Those type of things we want to support so they can address the issue of leaf blowers. But it wasn't where we wanted to put our climate attention. We are very concerned about rising sea levels and firestorms and disrupted food chain and things like that. So while we looked at them, they were small.
Betsy, it looked like you had something to add as well.
I just wanted to add that while we haven't addressed it through our climate action plan, we do actually have an ordinance where on spare the air days, you cannot use gas powered blowers. And that actually, given how many spare the air days we've had, has been fairly effective these days in curtailing the gas leaf blowers. It's not, there's still some enforcement issues, but as word gets out, it's actually helping the problem significantly.
Diane, you want to take one more question or provide one more question?
Let's see. I would love to provide one more question to the panelists, and then if the audience has more questions, maybe we have time to take one more from them as well. I wanted to hear from panelists about whether you felt the need to compromise on the climate action plan and how you handled that. If you came into roadblocks on the climate plan or felt a lot of pressure to compromise, what were those compromises and how are they handled? Volunteers. Betsy, go ahead.
So I think the biggest compromise that I'm feeling is through the budget and resourcing. And that's something that's just, especially in right now with the economic situation and COVID, that it's just, we're doing as much as we can, but that's been the biggest compromise is just how much we can do at a time and how quickly it's moving forward.
Yeah, I thought I'd weigh in too. As we looked at even just one aspect, sea level rise, and the cost of building sea walls in Menlo Park to protect us against the rising seas, we have about $1.2 billion worth of real estate, and I think 2,500 people living in the area that will be inundated by the first 3 to 6 feet of sea level rise. And so the cost of seawalls, protecting that area will be on the order of $400 million for a 6-foot seawall. And at that level, it dwarfs anything else in our budget for any one year. It's multiples over our budget. And if it's amortized over time, the time it takes the water to rise up over that, it still becomes a bigger part of the budget pie than things like libraries or police. So it's very interesting to me that we will go from, in most of my life, climate protection being zero part of anyone's budget to it being one of the major factors in a city's budget, the protection of its area from the damages of climate change. So I think, I think the proper optimum on a climate action plan is massive, sudden implementation of measures that eliminate the stranding of assets. And so that we have compromises like to let a bunch of projects go by while we do a public process. And those escape and they get implemented and those are stranded. So there, I do feel like we've made a lot of compromise just naturally, because the optimal solution is very impactful, sudden, and significant.
Yeah, I would echo that. I was going to say the schedule. So in my previous world, we did things on days and weeks. And then the sort of city process can be months and years. And so it's been an adjustment for me. When we had a draft climate action plan ready, we were assigned to do it in July and we had something ready to go in September. And I think it came to council in December. And so that time for me was like, oh, wow, this is really hard. So that was a way that I had to compromise. And, there's the city council's looking at dozens of issues, right? So we just had to get fit in on the calendar when we could. The other time was COVID. So we had this whole plan, 70 actions over 3 years and, potentially like the equivalent of 6 full-time equivalents working on this climate problem. And then COVID hit. We were ready to go. We were like, we had a done, written climate action plan. Then COVID hit. We couldn't meet, and that was hard, right? We kept saying, can't we just meet? But, you know, there was like, we have to work out the technology and, you know, get the commission reactivated, et cetera. So that was waiting. And then once we met, you know, we finalized the climate action plan, but we had to strip it down from the 70 actions to 6. So we had to make a huge compromise there. We tried to pick the most impactful 6. In the end, I actually think this compromise, it seemed like a bug, right? Like we had a problem, but I've now decided it's now a feature of our CAP, that it's short. And what we said, instead of it being like a 3-year or 5-year plan, which most climate action plans are, this is a 1-year plan. That's what we've said. So we said, okay, we'll strip it down to 6 because budget doesn't allow for us to do any more than this, because we had a huge budget shortfall in Menlo Park. So stripped it down to 6 measures, and we're going to do that within 1 year, and we're going to come back and sort of re-up after a year. And so in a way that makes the plan totally different from other climate action plans, but more flexible, more responsive. So again, I thought it was a bug, but now I think it's a feature.
Ray, go ahead. But I just want to note we have 2 other questions. I think they're pretty quick, and hopefully we can get those in after you. Go ahead, Ray.
I was just going to say the only thing that I've had to compromise on so far is just the amount of public engagement. So looking forward to what we have next to do in our CAP, it's ambitious. And I think that the public's going to be with us, but I think that we're going to need to respect them and explain what we're doing and get them excited about it, because some of these things are going to be talking about things that immediately impact property in place. And so I think because of timing and budget and whatnot, we still haven't engaged in that. And I've had to compromise in waiting for that. But hopefully we'll get there, because I think we're going to need to get there to get some of these things across the finish line.
Maybe one more question.
All right. Kathy, you had a very good question.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So it seems like one of the key things that enabled Menlo Park to develop this CAP, make this happen, was that you have this Environmental Quality Commission. And I'm just wondering, is there a written charter for this? Because it seems, you know, a lot of other communities don't have such a commission. And it would be interesting to know, you know, how you're structured, what's your mandate, and is there something in writing that the rest of us could look at, since everything else you're doing is open source? Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we do have a policy in place. It's available on our website, or we could certainly provide it to Doug and Diane to get it out to the participants. But we do have a specific policy for all of our commissions, including the Environmental Quality Commission, which lists what their charter is and how they're run.
I will just add that I think it might need a little bit of a refresh, because climate is like one word in there, because I think when it was originally done, you know, it was about heritage trees and zero waste. So climate has, like, kind of in the last year or 2 just become a really central part of what we do. And I don't think that's been reflected yet. We're just sort of going with it. So caveat that whatever we have is a little outdated.
I'm going to add one thing to that, though. I think the EQC is incredibly important, but I think what has worked in Menlo Park is that we've had a great EQC, but also we've had great staff, but also that we've had a Menlo Spark, which is a non-political nonprofit that's operating as a conduit for all of this that's taking place and helping to push it. And the reason why I say that is because in the past, what can happen with commissions, city commissions, is that they can become they can be sort of entrenched in the political dynamics of a community, and that can backfire on what's coming out of that commission. And so to have have a nonprofit that's quasi-institutional, that's working with everybody and is apolitical through this process, keeps things on track and keeps it out of the fray, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and just a quick addition, I'm really happy to see similar groups in other cities too, and some regional groups that are playing that role, and Sierra Club starting to make a concerted effort to work in all the cities supporting stronger climate action plans. So that's exciting to watch. Doug and Petra, I see that we're at 5:01.
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Okay.
Yeah, could I just jump in and close up here? So thank you, all the panelists. Petra, I'll let you close, final close, but thank you, panelists, and thank you, attendees. I think that there's opportunity for great collaboration going forward. I hope that maybe Diana and I could facilitate some more conversation between specific cities and Menlo Park if interested. I will write up a little summary of this meeting and include links to all of the documents and websites and meeting notes and whatnot. It's a really good story, but I think most importantly is take something from this and get inspiration and utilize some of the work that has been done by Menlo Park. And I do think, again, if you want to meet with Menlo Park, if you want to get the more one-on-one, let Diane and I know, because I think we can get a couple cities in a meeting with the Menlo Park team here. So thank you, panelists and audience. Petra, you want to close out?
Yeah, I just wanted to say an additional thank you to all of the panelists and to Diane for her incredible leadership. And just to say that this is an excellent example of what we're all about, which is collaborating and using each other to lift all of ourselves up. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again.